Hi, everyone. This is John Daly here for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. My regular co host, Thomas D. Howes, he had to bail out at the last second, so he'll be back with us next time. But we have a great guest on today to help make up for it. He is an astute and witty political thinker and writer whose work you may have read in Bloomberg, the Daily News, the New York Post, or maybe his Substack called the Ragged Pun Stack. He is a very I should mention too, he is a very funny stand-up comedian as well. So if you haven't checked him out, you'll definitely want to do that. He always draws big laughs for me. I'm talking about Robert George. Robert, thanks for joining me today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
It's an honor to be here, John. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to have you on. One thing I didn't mention in the intro was your political background. You worked at the RNC for a while, and I believe you actually worked under Newt Gingrich when he was Speaker. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. I had back in my younger days, I had two stints at the Republican National Committee. Once on the fundraising side, and then once on the grassroots organizing coalition side, and then went to work on Capitol Hill for a few years, predominantly for former Speaker Newt Gingrich, back in those crazy '90s days.
Yeah. Well, that was certainly a different time in American politics. And the theme of today's episode is actually the current state and perhaps even the future of our major political parties. Robert, I'm personally, and I'm guessing you're probably the same way. I'm of the belief that our country is best served when both parties are strong and competent and competing for people's votes.
Relatively sane, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's always good. It's always good to have two sane parties. I don't think that's the reality of, of the environment right now at this point in time. And I wanted to start with the Democrats. A recent New York Times piece painted a pretty bleak picture for the Democratic Party between the 2020 and 2024 elections, basically the Biden era. The Democrats lost a lot of ground on voter registration. There was this 4 year swing of an estimated 4.5 million voters that potentially switched over to the Republicans. I think some dropped out of the Democratic Party, some joined the Republican Party, but this was felt in virtually every state. And notably, it included male voters, young voters, and minorities. Robert, you were going to bring up too, and this will be an interesting topic. You were telling me about a statement released by the Third Way, but how did this happen, and how panicked should Democrats be about this, and what can they do to earn back voters?
Uh, I think the Democrats should be very much panicked by this. But first of all, I think we should step back and think this should not be a surprise, because I think even in the New York Times piece, it says actually voter registration is actually a lagging indicator of individual voter sentiment. So it's quite often that an individual's vote is the precursor to an eventual party switch. We saw that, going back into the 1980s when we first saw political realignment with Reagan. We talked about these individuals who were Reagan Democrats. They still were registered Democrats. Many of them still voted Democrats at the local level and the state level and so forth. But when Reagan came along, and he was giving a message that resonated with many of these people, and they switched. That was their first switch to voting for Republicans at the presidential level. That continued, and then it was years later you started to see that same kind of a shift, going from the presidential level, then seeping into the states. And so over the course of 30 years, what was 30 or 40 years, what was once called the solid South for the Democrats became the solid South for the Republicans. So in that sense, we saw in 2024, uh, every single state, with the exception, I believe, of Washington State, every single state in the 2024 election saw a swing to the Republican to Trump and Republican and the Republican Party, and that is. I mean, that didn't mean every single state switched, obviously, but all of the swing states, the 7 or 8 identified swing states, all flipped from voting for Biden in 2020 to voting for Trump in 2024. But even in solid blue states, you saw the same movement. It was anywhere between 7 to 10 points. So New Jersey, for example, went from going for Biden by 15 or 20 points in 2020 to going for Harris by only 5 or 6 points in 2024. And I said that was uniform. That was a uniform move in 2024. So the fact that we are now seeing the data that encapsulates the fact that support for the Democratic Party as measured by voter registration has kind of collapsed, and that's a problem that's a major problem for the Democrats. Now, the question we're going to have to get into, and I think this will be a large segment of our conversation here, is why that's happening. I think I was on X and having some discussions with folks on this over the last couple of days, and those who are sort of diehard Democrats just want to say that the main issue, the main problem that they have now, as in the reflection of this voter registration drop, is the same thing that ultimately defined the 2024 election, and that was the fact that Biden and then Harris were not able to address the issue of inflation, post-pandemic inflation, and I think that was probably the major issue in 2024. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement from that. In fact, just look at almost all the Western countries that have had elections since 2020 or 2021, and all of them have flipped. All of them flipped. The party that was in power during that pandemic and when inflation exploded globally, they ended up getting knocked out. So I think that's true. But I also think that what we're seeing here, though, is it's a greater hangover that is seeping into our politics right now. That is not just the inflation economic issue is, in a sense, somewhat, to use a word that was pushed around in 2021 and 2022, transitory. I think the inflation issue is transitory in terms of being a deeply seated issue that is attached to the Democratic Party. What I do think is a greater concern for the Democrats is the sense that the party is out of touch with working class voters of all backgrounds. I mean, we saw this strong move of Latino voters to the right. We saw slightly less, but still but still noticeable of Black men towards Republicans as well. And that again is also something that's been identifiable in these voter registration numbers.
And you had mentioned the part of this is a lot of it is I think related to the language that has been used by the Democratic Party, what some of the activist wing has been saying, and Democratic politicians, even if they don't necessarily endorse some of this stuff, are having having a real hard time trying to navigate through it. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's true. I mean, I think almost everyone agreed that one of the most effective ads that Donald Trump ran in 2024 was and it was ubiquitous. They took national buys and ran this ad on Saturday college football games, Sunday NFL games, and it was one where you had Kamala Harris uh, uh, basically defending uh, defending states that allowed trans surgeries in prison. Uh, the tagline was Donald Trump is for you, she's for they them. And this kind of goes back to something that had become what was had been dismissed as a minor issue in the late 20 teens and into the early 2020s of the so-called pronoun issue, where uh, the the academic progressive language and tone policing of academic progressive spaces had seeped in and taken over much of the Democratic Party, and not just the Democratic Party, but also large swaths of corporate America as well. Everybody, if you worked in corporate America, and particularly during the pandemic, and you were logging in for a Zoom meeting, you most likely were probably told or was expected of you to declare your pronouns. Uh, for a lot of people, they says, okay, whatever. But though there are some who just kind of felt that this was sort of commanded performative art. And why did everybody have to declare their pronouns? Because we want to show solidarity for those who are trans or identify as non-binary, and for a I guess for a significant a maybe ultimately a small part of the electorate, there was this kind of thought, well, the individuals or the community of which we are talking about is incredibly small. It's probably maybe 1 or 2% of the population. So why is the larger body politic being encouraged, if not shamed, into adopting this particular kind of a language? And in I think it was in 2021 or 2022. I was at Bloomberg, and I interviewed Roy Teixeira, who is currently with AEI, but has a long history of being a Democratic analyst, specifically looking at demography, Latin vote, and so forth. And uh, he, and again, this was going in. This is going into the 2022 midterms, and he was really cautioning because from what he was seeing, from his own discussions and interviews and so forth, was that the Democratic Party was losing entree to the Latino community, because one of the words that they adopted, one of the phrases they adopted, was Latinx, which was the idea. So the idea was, well, we want to show a non-binary term to address a community that comes from that has a language and a culture that is explicitly gendered. There's a reason why Latino and Latina and so forth. But we think, again, because we feel it's important to be inclusive to our non-binary friends, that we have to say Latinx, and there was polling data uh, going back several years showing that this not only was it not resonating with to the extent, rephrase that, to the extent that it had any impact at all on Latino communities, it was a negative one. And so that we saw that. Roy Teixeira also said that he thought that the Democrats were overselling themselves on the issue of immigration, in the sense of using immigration, and particularly pushing back against the MAGA restrictionist idea, using that as a way to approach Latino voters. Teixeira's research showed that not only was that a failing argument, it was in fact causing hostility among some of those voters as well, because as anybody could tell you, not all Latinos are not a block. They are not a mega block. There's differences from Cubans to Venezuelans to Mexicans to Ecuadorians, Colombians, and so forth. And in many ways, they see the world in a middle class, working class value base that the Democrats were not speaking to, and in many cases were pushing away.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example. I may be remembering this wrong, but I believe there was a time, I don't know if it was during the 2020 election cycle or perhaps after Biden had won, but I remember him actually like correcting somebody about saying no, it's not Hispanic, it's Latinx, and I'm pretty sure that was an Hispanic person he was correcting. Again, I could be misremembering that, but yeah, I thought that was such a wild thing that just nobody was on board with that, and the Democrats kept on using it, and really trying hard to make it the term that was used, in general speak. And I thought that was wild. Speaking of all these different phrases, let's go. I brought this up a minute ago. You had brought this topic up to me right before I hit the record button. A group called the Third Way, and a number of words they are calling on the Democratic Party to basically jettison from their vocabulary. Can you talk about what the Third Way is, and what you read this morning about that, Robert?
Well, yeah, exactly. So Third Way is, just it's a think tank. It's a think tank that came out of the 90s. Was sort of a post Bill Clinton type of type of an organization. So it's not surprising that they would have what for one of a better phrase could be considered a centrist approach. But they circulated a memo over the last couple of days, urging Democrats to stay away from certain words, certain phrases, as they want to communicate with the electorate in preparation of going into the midterms next year. And some of the words on their list that they are encouraging Democrats to stay away from, Democratic candidates to stay away from, are privilege, violence, as in, say, the phrase environmental violence, quote unquote, dialoguing, triggering, holding space, microaggression, body shaming, cultural appropriation, birthing person, cisgender, dead naming, heteronormative, patriarchy, LGBTQIA plus, BIPOC, allyship, incarcerated people, the unhoused. Given the fact that your co-host is on today, I guess technically this episode is unhoused. But but so here you are. But that's where we are. And I mean, I think that this memo going out is obviously connected with this, this voter registration issue. And as we said before, this sense that let's just say over the last decade, from if you want to date back to the last couple of years of the Obama administration, when, for want of a better phrase, the academic left uh, ended up gaining an outsized influence within not just regular progressive spaces, but a larger segment of the Democratic Party as a whole. And because Trump was taking up so much oxygen, so much of the political space, and a lot of the craziness that was attached to Trump and MAGA and so forth, I don't think that there was enough focus by political experts, by the media, in terms of the real impact that this movement was having within the Democratic Party. And it took a long time. I hate to use this, but since I'm a cancer survivor, I can sort of say this. You don't notice that this little irritation that might be on your skin might be a symptom of something worse, until a few years later, when it becomes something bigger, and then you have to say, "Oh, wow, we've got a problem here," and here we are.
No, I think that's a good way of looking at it, and it is interesting and sort of ironic that for so many years, and we've been talking about this, people like you and I, for a long time, Robert, just how reliant the Democratic Party had been on identity politics, and as that began to fade, I don't think so much. I don't think it has as much to do with Trump as it has just kind of jumping the shark. People just kind of got to the point where this is just ridiculous. But now it's the Democratic Party itself is sort of dealing with an identity crisis. They don't know really what to do. And one person, I wanted to sort of shift this a little bit. One Democrat who is, I think, maybe carving out a little niche for himself at the moment. This is a guy who's clearly interested in running in 2028. I'm talking about California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Handsome Gavin, handsome Gavin handsome Gavin from California. You're on the air. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, phenomenal hair, phenomenal hair. I don't think we can take that away from him, but he's been doing some fairly strange things online, or at least he has this social media team that's I don't know how closely they are connected with him, but there's clearly some
Oh,
sort of connection. Um, but yeah, they're using this MAGA style imagery and MAGA style slogans to celebrate Newsom rather than Trump. It's basically parody, and I personally have some kind of nuanced thoughts on this, but I'm curious, Robert, what your take is. Is this smart politically? Is it sustainable, or what is it exactly?
I mean, it's mega MAGA trolling, if I can coin that phrase. Uh, and is it smart politics? I actually think, um, in the short term, it is smart politics, because if nothing else, it's getting those on the right uh, uh, kind of up in arms about how stupid Newsom is in doing this. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. Why is he doing this? Blah blah blah. And even some other Democrats, or the pearl clutching Democrat types, are saying, oh, we need to be more serious and kind of about this. Um, if you've got your opponents kind of in a lather about what you're doing in terms of your messaging, while you are blissfully kind of having fun with it, and getting some people in your own base kind of energized, saying, yeah, this is some of the stuff that we should have been doing for a while, because Donald Trump rode mockery to a takeover of the Republican Party, and two trips to the White House. Crushing political norms, and basically not giving a damn about what is supposed to be polite politicking. He doesn't care about what the New York Times or the Washington Post has to say. He's going to come up with a diminishing nickname for Marco Rubio, and for Jeb Bush, and for Hillary, and for Biden, and for all of these people, and not care about whether it's uncouth, and so I think Newsom is kind of attacking that, trying to almost say, well, this is the end result. This is the end result of this. I'm going to use the AI deification of Trump, to put it on myself. He's getting people talking about him, and if he's planning on running for president in 2028, the first thing you got to do is get people to notice you. Earlier on in the year, he started out trying to do it with via podcasts, where he started having semi-serious conversations with some MAGA types and some on the right, like Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk and so forth, and that got him. There was a little bit of traction here and there, and now he's kind of going. And admittedly, also, this is August. August is almost always political silly season, regardless of what the year is. So I think there's some of that as well, but in late 2023 and going into early 2024, Donald Trump, the person that Donald Trump feared the most was Gavin Newsom. There was that when this talk was out there about trying to push Biden aside before the summer of 2024. But so we're going into 2023, early 2024, when there was talk about trying to nudge him aside, or trying to see if there would be a primary or things like that. The person that Donald Trump was most nervous about was Gavin Newsom, because remember, Donald Trump sees politics through the prism of television, and forget about what shape California is in, and goodness knows there's a lot of problems over there. Gavin Newsom is a tall, good-looking, greatly hair coiffed white man, and the Democrats have problems, with white men, and they blame they blame 26 fairly or otherwise. A lot of the blame for the loss of 2016 and 2024 is that, oh well, we ran women candidates, we ran unpopular women, and so it's more likely that the 2028 candidate for president on the Democratic side is probably going to be a white man, and so Gavin Newsom is the governor of the most diverse state in the country. So there he is.
Yeah, no, I think that's some really good analysis, and I said I had some nuanced thoughts on this. You basically echoed pretty much everything I believe. I did see some on the right, and complaining about this. I think make a good point when the social media stuff turned to sort of the satirizing of the Trump assassination attempt, and people say, okay, well, someone died here. I get that. That makes total sense to me. But yeah, I think for the most part, yeah, I think he's getting the attention that he wants for himself. And I think Sarah Longwell, she basically said what you're talking about. This is an example of the left holding up a mirror to the MAGA, which do some really weird stuff in MAGA world, and kind of showing them this is what you look like to the people that aren't MAGA. This crazy stuff you're doing with these portraits of people around you praying and all this stuff to you, and it's I think it's sort of an interesting thing. I don't think it's going to last that long, but I think it is sort of achieving its goals at this point in time.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's right. That's exactly right. And Newsom is, in a sense, effective in showing some of the real absurdity of Trump and MAGA that we've all just sort of normalized over the last few years. Because there is, to use a certain phrase that became popular very briefly in 2024, there is a certain level of weirdness attached to MAGA in their deification of the president. And so if Newsom has a little bit of fun trying to shine a light on that, fine. But again, it's not ultimately going to linger into 2028, when people are going to be looking at things from a more serious perspective.
Before I shift over to some Republican topics, I did want to ask you about something that happened. So we're recording this Friday morning. There is news that came out. This episode will air on Monday, so there's bound to be more information that's going to come out. So it's kind of hard to talk about it a lot. But John Bolton, he is ambassador, but John Bolton, his home was raided this morning by the FBI on grounds of national security concern reportedly related to classified documents. The operation seemed to have been personally okayed by Kash Patel, the FBI director. Again, we don't know much. Do you have any comments you'd like to throw in there? It's the thing with this is that my inclination is not to jump out too far ahead of the skis on this. We know that Bolton is an opponent, as a political rival of Donald Trump, the Trump administration. He used to be part of the Trump administration in the first term, but he's definitely got on Trump's bad side. I wish I could be able just to sort of give this automatic benefit of the doubt to the Trump administration that there is a serious basis for this. At this point, I just don't know. Maybe there is. Again, I don't. The benefit of the doubt isn't there for me. It would not surprise me if this was just sort of a haphazardly concocted initiative. So, what do you think about that, Robert?
Like you, I am reluctant to give the benefit of the doubt to this administration on something like this. As you said, John Bolton went from being part of the first Trump administration to becoming an opponent in the post impeachment, both impeachments era. So it's hardly a conspiracy theory to think that there's a certain level of payback, both personal and systematic, in a move like this. Personal because Bolton crossed Trump. number one, but also systematic in the sense of uh, Trump is very much focused on relitigating the political and legal cases against him of the last several years, and he felt personally insulted that the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago and seized classified documents that he had refused to return to the archives, and this looks like a case of of payback on that side, because we've had these examples in the past where presidents and other high-ranking officials accidentally took classified documents with them. Uh, they were asked to return them, and in almost every other case situation, they were returned. So we didn't need to have a FBI raid anywhere. Uh, Donald Trump, the then former president, was the only person who asked multiple times to return documents, basically stared down the archives and other official authorities, dragged it out for over a year until they said, finally, look, we have to get this stuff, and we're going after it. That was the origin of the case against Trump on the document side. So my sense is, if I wanted to give somebody a benefit of the doubt, I would probably give a benefit of the doubt to John Bolton, to saying if he does have classified documents, it's more like those other cases in previous administrations where he took things that were he took things accidentally, and he was I'm imagining that he officially asked to return them. Again, we do, there's a whole lot of stuff here we don't know, but to your point, uh, skeptical about giving the benefit of the doubt to the administration, given the fact that it's been focused on getting payback on a number of individuals and a number of institutions since the president came back into power. And my gut is telling me to give Bolton more the benefit of the doubt, if indeed he does have classified documents.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see again. I'll just emphasize we're recording this on Friday, just a couple hours after this raid, so things could change by the time this airs. So yeah, I did want to just make sure that we qualified that. I did want to ask a little bit about the Republican Party, Robert. This was the section that Thomas was going to ask you about, so I'm going to try my best. So one what's interesting to me, I'm part of this organization, the Reagan Caucus. There are many people within the Reagan Caucus who view J.D. Vance as more of a threat to things that we hold dear, the Constitution, to our alliances with other countries. They view him as more of a threat than even Donald Trump, potentially. I don't know. I tend to believe Trump is a unique threat in many ways, but I do see the point they're making. They view someone as, like Vance, as having this ideological post-liberal view of the world, as opposed to Trump, who's always just kind of looking out for himself. He's doing what he wants to do. Um, the other day, I know that Chris Rufo, someone you're probably familiar with, just from his reputation, but he made some comment. He was on a panel. I don't know quite the context of it, but he said the goal of the right should be to capture, destroy, subvert, and rule over these national institutions, basically, which would seem sort of the antithesis of conservatism. Do you see this Robert, this post-liberal strain of basically kind of going after these institutions and sort of bending them to a certain will. Is that something that you see as the future of the Republican Party, or do you think that once Trump's gone, there's going to be all this open space for competing sides to kind of try and come after Republican voters, come after the Republican base, and make a better argument?
Yeah, no, I think I think it's definitely more the former. I think your description of the difference between Trump and Vance, I think, is quite apt. Trump is in it for the Trump is kind of in it for the money and for the aggrandizement. Uh, JD Vance is a true believer to the extent he has solid specific beliefs that you can hold on to. Um, we're seeing a little bit of this in real time in terms of what the administration is doing with academia, is doing with law firms that were supposedly apparently on the wrong side or had hired people that were former DOJ lawyers and so forth. It's clear that this administration wants to, bring Harvard, Columbia, a lot of these other institutions, who I will let's be very very clear, made some major errors in 2024 in terms of the anti-Semitic protests and pro-Palestine protests and all of this and all of this kind of stuff. But I think it is fair to say that going forward, a President Vance is going to be even more aggressive in uh, going after academia to change it to the extent that the conservative movement, the MAGA movement, sees academia as being a major entrenchment of the left, and to the extent that they can use the levers of the federal government to root out that leftism and try to get more and more either conservative academics into major academic institutions, or at the very least, get those who present themselves as more ideologically neutral. Now, to be clear, and any an institution that is, calls itself the Reagan Caucus, should rightly be concerned with the fact that the left has dominated overwhelmingly uh, the academic apex of the country. There should be more uh, ideological diversity amongst the professorial class. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. But to the extent that the federal government wants to try and go on a purge, that's something that's a little bit disconcerting, and yeah, we should kind of speak out against that. Uh, and as far to Rufo's larger point, uh, I think an energized ideology that is attempting a I think an ideological weaponized federal government regardless of what position it's coming from, is not really something that people of goodwill should really support.
No, I think that's exactly right. And it as a conservative, Reagan conservative, it's particularly annoying to me that they do these things under the guise of conservatism. This is a conservative, and it's really not.
Well,
Robert, I had go ahead.
if I could just quickly throw this out there,
Uh,
um, I think it is. You are absolutely right. Now, I think it's fair, and this is probably something for a longer conversation. It is reasonable to say that over time, conservatism can change as the times change, as issues change, and so forth. The same way that liberalism and so forth will change. But I think it is interesting that a supposedly conservative president has managed to make tax increases a la tariffs palpable to the conservative movement. We have a commerce secretary that is talking about basically saying that if Intel wants access to the federal funds that were supposed to be made available through the Biden administration's Chips Act, it has to accept take the federal government taking a 10% cut, and we're getting conservatives. Oh yeah, sure, all of this sure, that seems kind of fine. Um, if the Democrats tried this kind of stuff, 20, 30 years ago, they would have been laughed off the political stage. But we have a supposedly conservative administration advocating what used to be, the wish list of the Democratic left. So
no,
yeah, we.
no, I say many times. I mean, today's Republican Party is far more ideologically aligned with Bernie Sanders' vision for America than they were Ronald Reagan. Than they are. It's crazy that within a pretty short amount of time, this transformation has happened, and so many people have just kind of gone along with it, not really realizing that what's coming out of the right is the same sort of stuff that's coming out of the hard left. But that's one of the reasons the Reagan caucus exists, I suppose, to kind of
We've got a
bring
new. I think we've come up with a new phrase that we can talk about these economic shift. We can call it nationalist socialism. Has a
there
ring
you
to it, right?
go. Excellent. Excellent. Well, Robert, you've been very generous with your time. I did want to ask you about one more item before we go today. There is another huge national story that I haven't talked about yet. And this one I'm confident will still be going strong by the time this episode airs. Cracker Barrel, Robert. The restaurant chain, they modernized some of these restaurants' decor, including the logos design. They explained that the CEO explained the sales have been in decline, and they're making some alterations in hopes of attracting younger customers. Many on the right, Robert, consider this a woke betrayal of America, or something along those lines. They're calling for boycotts. Chris Rufo, we just brought him up. He said we must break the barrel. Robert, we're seeing stocks tank for Cracker Barrel as I'm recording this. Is nothing safe from the culture war anymore? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, as I posted on X yesterday, can we compromise and break both the crackers and the barrel? Uh,
Excellent.
uh, so I live up in New York, and I think I have eaten in a Cracker Barrel, I think once, when I was visiting my family in Atlanta a couple of years ago. So Cracker Barrel is not regularly much on my menu. Uh, so they changed the logo, and apparently there's supposedly other changes that are going on inside that is the new CEO is has talked about apparently making the place more friendly for people of all backgrounds. So the MAGA right is seeing this as Cracker Barrel going gay, and which is kind of because under the previous regime of Cracker Barrel. Cracker Barrel had been seen as sort of like Hobby Lobby and Chick-fil-A as being corporations that were kind of on the right, and by making themselves explicitly attractive to families, they tended to give negative vibes, if you will, to those who have alternative lifestyle. So, any the new CEO apparently wants to try to modernize that image, and so therefore they're being accused of going woke. Again, that's how I understand what's at play here. But to answer your question, there is there is nothing. The culture wars. The culture war is no longer cold. The culture war is very, very hot, and there are these skirmishes that will pop out at almost at any moment. We see it with the two male cheerleaders on the Minnesota Vikings cheerleading squad. Now, these male cheerleaders, unlike the other most other male cheerleaders, are there sort of in supportive roles to throw women up in the air and catch them and so forth. These particular male cheerleaders are dancing with the girls and waving pom poms and so forth, and that's created a major outrage on the rights on the rights social media. So Cracker Barrel is part of that milieu, and just like Bud Light was a couple of years ago. Target is been getting it from both sides on the over DEI charges. Uh, but we have we have a president who believes that he believes that being a champion, being a champion of the right on the culture wars helped get him into the White House. We also saw him, wanting to uh, go after the Smithsonian because apparently they're teaching things like slavery was bad. Who knew? Uh, so yeah, Donald Trump, um, one of his great strengths, if you will, is that has been part. He's been part of the popular culture, the American popular culture, for 40 something years. He knows it about as well as anybody, and he knows how he grew up in the 80s in the tabloid wars in New York. I mean, I've worked for both the New York Post and the New York Daily News, and in the heyday when the headlines were going after one another and competing with one another, Donald Trump knows that, and he knows how to inject himself into into the culture, into the cultural streams, and a lot of it rebounds in terms of attention for himself. But there are many other culture warriors who take that, who take his lead and go even further with it.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think this one's particularly annoying to me just because it seems so mundane. It's not even that, I don't know, but it's you're right about the way that the Trump, and MAGA world capitalize off of this stuff and get some momentum with it. I remember during his first term, um, he was really, I think, under some scrutiny. I can't. There was lots of stuff he was under scrutiny for during his first term. But there was some. He was politically in trouble on some issue, and kind of out of nowhere, he starts tweeting about NFL players kneeling, which people had really stopped talking about. Almost a year earlier, it wasn't really in the news anymore, and that brought that whole controversy back into play, and it kind of got everybody talking about that instead of whatever trouble he was in. And it's just, yeah, it's sort of frustrating to me, just how easily distracted from serious issues this country is. All you have to do is
To make everything come full circle, you're right. I mean, I don't know. It might have been something to do with the Mueller report or something like that.
right.
That he was doing in the first term. But to make everything go full circle, there was, for better or worse, there was uh, there was a resistance in that first term, and that kind of came out from where you had progressive fighters in the streets. You had a divided Republican base in terms of pushing back against some of the things that Trump was trying to do. You had a united Democratic Party pushing back and so forth. Um, so much of that is no longer in effect right now. We have a unified you have a very much unified Republican Party, Republican base. They have incredibly narrow margins in both the House and the Senate, and yet they are getting through his entire platform. The Democratic Party, as we're saying, is divided, and it seems like it's falling apart at the base, and energized Donald Trump is trying to use all of the weapons he has at his disposal to take apart long-standing left-wing institutions. And so, we're the country's going to have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Robert, thanks again. Thank you so much for coming on the Reagan Caucus podcast. It's always a lot of fun talking to you. Do you have any upcoming projects or appearances in the works that you want to tell people about?
Well, let's see. What do I have coming up? I actually do have a couple of writing projects that I'm working on that I can't exactly disclose right now. But I would say, definitely continue following me on X/Twitter at Rob George. I'm also findable on Instagram at both Rob George 29 and Robert George Comedy. So Rob George 29, you get to see a little. That's where I promote more of my serious political stuff, things like that. Robert George Comedy is where I publicize my upcoming dates in stand up. One of which will be September 25th at the Grizzly Pear Comedy Club in Midtown Manhattan. So, folks, you can follow. You can keep track of me right there.
Excellent. If you can check Robert out, again, he's a very funny guy, as I'm sure you got some hints on this episode. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. If you watch today's episode on YouTube, as always, I ask that you make sure you like the video and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or some other audio platform, please like and subscribe as well. And Robert, thanks again, and I'll see the rest of you. We'll see. Thomas will be back next week, and we'll see you the next time on the Reagan Caucus podcast.